How's it going, my bakers? Hope you're having a great day. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're making something pretty unique. It's a bread without salt. So let's go to the kitchen and check it out. Pane Sciocco is a Tuscan bread made with no salt. And it's as simple as that. It's just bread without salt. Of course, that changes the methods for making it. But at the end of the day, it's just another loaf. Now, there's a couple of theories on why Tuscan bread is made without salt. One of them being that Tuscan food can be quite rich. So eating an unseasoned bread with it balances out the flavors. Another theory says that Tuscan bakers never used to add salt because salt was just too expensive back in the day, and that's probably the main reason. Now, this bread may be saltless, but it's not bland at all. A long, slow fermentation and the use of a pre-ferment builds a lot of flavor here, and it goes really well with some salty toppings. So let's get right to it and see what we need to make it. We'll need some white bread flour, some whole wheat flour, some water, and a very tiny amount of yeast. For the whole recipe, we'll only be using 1/10 of a gram. Salt normally slows down fermentation, and because there's no salt, we only need a very small amount of yeast. And this, of course, also cuts down on the cost of this bread. The price comes down basically to what you paid for the flour. Now, as for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, something to score the loaf with. You can use a sharp knife or a razor blade. I do prefer the razor blade. It is a lot sharper than the knife. The final proof will be done in a bread basket, although this can be made into a freestanding loaf. If you do want to use a bread basket and you don't have one, I have a solution for you. You can just use a regular cake tin, lined with a cloth. It works exactly the same as a bread basket. To make a round loaf, simply use a bowl. For baking this loaf, I will use my cast iron combo cooker. One side of it is a flat skillet and the other side is a pot. It keeps the heat really well. And even more importantly, it traps steam inside, which helps the bread expand. Now, if you don't have one of these, you could bake the bread underneath an upturned bowl. That's a metal bowl, of course. Or you could just use a thick bottom tray, the heaviest tray that you have. And to create some steam, you can use a spray bottle with water. If you don't have any of this, just bake it on a regular tray with no steam. It'll still make a good bread. And so with that out of the way, let's start making that bread. It all starts with a pre-ferment. This here is a bigger. It is a stiff pre-ferment at only 50% hydration. And it is the pre-ferment used in Italy. All the yeast from this recipe is going in the pre-ferment. Give it a quick stir to dissolve, and then add the flour. Mix it until there's no more dry flour left. You can even pick it up and squish it with your hands. Just make sure there's no more dry flour. The advantage of using such low hydration pre-ferment is that it ferments more slowly, which is great, especially if you're baking in a hot climate. And I guess that could be the reason why it's the common pre-ferment in Italy. Once you're done mixing, cover it up and we'll leave it to ferment. It'll take around 10 to 12 hours. And by the way, if you want to learn more about yeasted pre-ferments, check out my video on the Principles of Baking playlist. There are 3 more types of pre-ferment that can be used, but back to our bigger. During the 10 to 12 hours, it should puff up nicely, at least doubling in size, almost tripling. I usually just make it in the evening and it's ready by the next day. This is going to add a nice fermented flavor to our bread. And of course, it is the thing that's going to make the bread rise. Now, as ever, I'm going to be using cold water. Since we're kneading by hand, this dough is going to warm up quite a lot. So grab a large bowl, pour in the water, then grab the bigger and tear it up into little pieces and throw it in the water. Tearing it up will just make it easier to work with. I actually quite like this minimal yeast method. Normally when using pre-ferment like this, I would be adding more yeast at this point. But not adding any yeast and just leaving it to ferment for even longer will greatly improve on the flavor. After you added the bigger, drop in the whole wheat flour and the white flour. Now grab your scraper and mix it to a dough. Mix it in a bowl until there's no more dry flour left and then tip it out on the table. We can start kneading it. This dough is not sticky at all, so I'll be using the regular kneading method. What I like to do is press down and forwards with the heel of my right hand, then using the fingers on my left hand I fold the piece of dough under the heel of my right hand. Then turn it and repeat. This whole process will take no more than 5 minutes. And once you're finished, the dough should be nice and smooth, and when you pull on it, it should resist. This is ready for the bulk fermentation stage now. Pop it in a bowl and take its temperature. Around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 Fahrenheit is just about right for this. If your dough is warmer, it will ferment more rapidly. If it's cooler, it will take longer. It will take long anyway, because this is a slow fermented bread using very little yeast, so cover it up and leave it for an hour and a half. It should start puffing up during this time. Now we can give it a fold. Folding will help with tightening the dough, and this step also acts as the degassing step. And I've got videos on that in the Principles of Baking playlist too. To perform the fold, drop the dough out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until it reaches point where it started. Then flip it smooth side up again and tighten it against the table. And that's the fold done. Back in the bowl it goes, cover it up and leave it for another hour and a half. Now it should really start puffing up. After the second fermentation stage, we can pre-shape this dough. Pre-shaping gives us another chance to build some tension in the dough. Salt actually helps strengthen the dough and strengthen the gluten, and since we're not using it, the dough is a little bit loose. So drop it out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it, cross the two sides over in the middle, fold the top down, turn it around, and fold the other side down. Then place it with the smooth side up again, cover it, and let it rest for 15 minutes. After the resting step, we can do the final shaping. Dust the dough lightly, then release it from the table using a scraper. Once again, place it on the table with the smooth side down. Now flatten it out, and then stretch out and cross the top left corner and top right corner over in the middle. You want to end up with kind of like a triangle shape. And once you have done that, grab the top, fold it down and push it forwards. We want to roll this into a loaf, and every time you roll it back, push it forwards. This will make it nice and tight, and the tighter it is, the better it will spring open as it's baking. The tightness will help it keep its shape. Once you get to the bottom, seal the seam up. Lastly, you can take the loose ends and fold them down. This will make the loaf nice and neat. At this point, I decided that I will not be using the cloth in my bread basket. The wooden basket can leave a really nice pattern on the loaf. I don't usually bake without the cloth, but it makes for a nice change. Now if you want to do this, it's important to fill the lines with flour. So just sprinkle the basket and then rub the flour in. This will ensure that there's a nice imprint of lines on the loaf. And of course the flour will prevent it from sticking to the basket. As you can see, I shaked out a little bit of the excess flour from the basket. But it's not going to go to waste. I'll use it to cover the loaf with. And the flour that I'm putting on the loaf now will be absorbed by the loaf. So don't worry, it's not going to be too much or anything. Now the loaf goes in the basket with the smooth side down. So when we place the loaf in the oven, the smooth side will be pointing in the right direction, which is up. Okay, so cover the loaf and leave it for the final proof. It may take an hour to an hour and a half. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat your oven to 220 degrees Celsius, fan off. That's 430 Fahrenheit. Also don't forget to preheat your baking vessel. It will do most of the baking after all. Leave the bread to rise until it's almost doubled in volume. And this looks just about right. If yours hasn't risen, just leave it for longer. But if it has, make sure you don't burn your table. Get your hot pan out the oven, remove the lid, drop the loaf right into the middle. With any luck, it won't be stuck to the basket. If it is, don't panic. Don't shake it around too much. Just lift it up and turn it around. You want to kind of rotate it slowly and let the sides release first and then drop it out. Brush off any excess flour, then grab your knife or your razor blade and score your loaf. And there's no right or wrong here. You can do any pattern that you like. Score it about 1.5 centimeters or half an inch deep. Now cover it with the lid and bake it for 20 minutes. After the first 20 minutes, we need to remove the lid. The steam has done its job. Now we just need to finish the crust, so pop it back in the oven for another 15 minutes of baking. And there you have it. That's how you make Pane Sciocco. By the way, Sciocco doesn't just mean saltless. It also means silly and stupid, or even crazy. But there's nothing crazy about this. It's a perfectly fine bread, and it tastes great. And if you need to cut down on salt in your diet, this may be a great option for you. But even if you don't, I really encourage you to try out this bread. It tastes great, and with toppings like these, it's just a match made in heaven. I feel like I should do some more saltless breads on the channel. So what do you think about saltless bread? Do you know of any other recipes? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here, subscribe to the channel, click right here. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.